I'm just going to repeat it quick. So I invite people who contribute towards making the planet a good place in their own way into these conversations. And the highlight is fully on you. And it will be transcribed.
Okay.
It will be added to a Roam graph. Roam is a beautiful tool that allows you to associatively connect written information. So that if we talk about children, for example, and we want to find out who else was talking about children and then also maybe impact in their conversations, we can find those cross-references. And it'll be shared with everybody who has access to the Roam graph, which is roughly 50 people. And these 50 people all have been part of conversations.
Okay.
And I'll also post my subjective summary on the Substack that is received by 1,600 and read by 800 people.
Okay.
And some of them might then at one point also become part of the
Okay.
Roam. Yeah.
Cool.
That's what we do.
Excellent.
And
I think it's awesome. I think it's awesome, and I'm really like honored for you to ask me to jump into the conversation. So I'm excited to share anything and everything.
That's beautiful. So there's well, the reason why you're here is because I mean we met several times briefly over the last years,
right?
And it's you are one of the people of those meetings that we met at that left a lasting impression on me because of your curiosity, because of the life you have streaming through you. That feels like that should be the way life streams through a human, and also because your focus is on sharing important information with the world through media, and so we watched, for example, your documentary on the brain and the brain development in children, and I think that's super important information for people to become educated parents, right? That's crucial. But before we go into all of that, there's two leading question, or basically one leading question, but to frame that, there's a first one. The leading question will be, in what ways are you, Stephen, contributing towards making the planet a good place? And in order for everybody who might listen to contextualize this,
right,
it is helpful to understand the configuration of Stephen.
Right.
Who are you? And we have 2 hours in total for the whole thing. So we're not limited, really. We can also do a second one if we feel like we're limited after 2 hours. So feel free to like really go crazy. So let's open with the first one. Who is Stephen and why?
Who is Stephen and why? And I would have to answer that question in two parts. Is who was Stephen, and then who is Stephen? Because over the past 3 to 4 years, there really has been a massive shift in the way I see myself, the way I understand myself, my relationships with others, my role in the world, why I'm here. And it's a dramatically very different approach from the Stephen that I was. And I got to that journey which I think is a lifelong journey. It's not something that happens immediately. By being slapped in the face and punched in the gut over and over and over and over again until I sort of realized, wait a second, something's not gelling right. So part of the back history is, grew up in a wonderful family in Colombia. Both my parents were born in Colombia. My grandparents were all immigrants in between the wars from Poland, Romania, Ukraine, or Bessarabia, which is now Ukraine and Turkey. So a lot of mix of Eastern European and Mediterranean blood. And I grew up in Colombia, and with not religious at all, but my family was, and I am Jewish by birth. And the Jewish community was 5,000 people in all of Colombia, so very protective, very insular, very small, with very clear worldviews about get a really good education and go make money. That is what life is about. And I've sort of not recently sort of tagged it as a sort of a survivalist, materialist view of the world. It's all about surviving and acquiring stuff. And then if you acquire enough stuff and you do it in a semi-decent way, then you pass off that stuff onto your kids. And then, so very much the role models were more entrepreneurial, set up a business, don't rely on people, rely on your community, go get an education. Education is very important to thrive. So I left Colombia when I was a teenager because this was the Pablo Escobar, the beginning of the Pablo Escobar era. This was in 1982. And my mom said, we got to get you out of this country. You kids have to go to the United States, get an American education. You're going to have a lot more opportunity there. And again, very much around this pathway of get a really good education so you can get a good job or start a business and go make money. That's what, good Jewish boys do. Find a nice lady and then set up a family. So I went to high school, ended up, being a very good student, went to Brown University, sort of a good liberal arts college, and started down this pathway of, I studied European history, but ended up working in a bank, in Citibank, which is sort of, I remember when I got the job, which is an entire other story of how I ended up getting this job, which is very funny, is I was at the bank and I took it as a year off. I kind of said, I've been liberal arts. The last math course I took was pre-calculus and I hated it because I had a lousy teacher. So I guess it's probably good to balance all this liberal arts education with some real world business stuff. And at that point, it was a 6-month training program in the City Court Tower on the first floor. So you're like 22 years old, 23 years old, graduate from college, good salary, and you're doing a mini MBA. And I learned a tremendous amount, but I was not happy. It's just not my thing, but it was good education. And eventually I moved to Spain, and then there was a long sequence of entrepreneurial initiatives. And basically said, I need to create my own opportunity because I came from an entrepreneurial family. My stepfather was a very successful businessman, or is a very successful businessman. So I had that model. So I went down this path of setting up different businesses, and quite a few of them just crashing. It's just they didn't work. I worked really hard. I put in all of my effort to make it happen. Some of them did work, but nothing that was sort of massive. And eventually I left Spain. I was in the Bay Area in the late 90s. And really, my mind opened tremendously. Not only because it was the tail end of the internet boom, but I just met people with different attitudes towards business. The question of how are you going to change the planet? What's your contribution to the world and within the context of your business was something that growing up in Colombia, son of a sock maker and my stepfather making plastic pipes, there was no ever a conversation about what is your impact in the world. It's like make money and then you can do good things with the money that you make and give back, and charity is important, but never think about what your role really is in creating that impact. So San Francisco and the mindset in the Bay Area at that point in time, I just met some amazing individuals. Some of them had made a tremendous amount of money, unbelievably humble. It's just, you would never know what they've done, what they've accomplished. I remember meeting this one, a mentor of mine said, you have to go meet for coffee, this one called Ann Bowers. And I met with this woman, Ann Bowers, and we talked for a long time. I had no idea who she was. And then, I asked her, so Ann, what are you doing now? She says, well, I run my husband's foundation. And her husband was Bob Noyce, who was the co-founder of Intel. She was the head of HR at Apple when Apple started. So she's actually mentioned like 4 or 5 or 6 times in that famous Steve Jobs biography. Mm-hmm. But at no point in the conversation was there she was like, her attention was on me. Mm-hmm. Like, who is this guy? Like, let's have a nice time together. So that sort of opened a little crack in the fissure. And I started to meet, some fascinating people, some of them very wacky and very spiritual paths and clairvoyant paths and great entrepreneurs, just all sorts of crazy things. And I was happy as a clown, but then the internet bubble burst. Mm-hmm. And I was like, okay. I need, it's like, I joined as the 4th employee for an online marketing company. We grew it to like 20-something people. We actually sold it as part of a merger of 8 companies coming together with this very prominent Danish entrepreneur that orchestrated the deal. So I had made paper money, and it was like, oh my God, this works. Mm-hmm. But it all sort of evaporated. Mm-hmm. And eventually I then had a stint in London through one of our partner companies that was a strategy firm, because then I said, Stephen, go just get a job and stabilize. And this was 2004, and I was working my butt off, ended up ascending very quickly in the strategy firm. And I was driving to the first client I had sold to kick off a project with Fujitsu. And it's like in my career path, this was like a big thing. And my dad calls me up because he was going in for a routine prostate surgery. And he says, I'm really nervous about the surgery. I wish you guys were here. I'm like, Dad, it's a half an hour procedure, 45 minutes. You're going to be totally fine. I have this I can't be in Colombia right now. I'm kicking off this project, blah, 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 blah. I go kick off the project, everything fantastic. I get home, and then I get a call from my brother. I said, Papi died. I'm like, what? Yeah. It's like, his surgery went fine. He was back in the room, and a couple hours later, his heart just went, boom.
Wow.
And I was like, what am I doing? Mm-hmm. What are I'm working 60, 70 hours. My career is progressing. All of this is wonderful, but it's not, there's something wrong here. So I eventually moved back to Spain.
When did that happen? When did that happen?
That was in 2004.
Wow.
So it was a while ago.
I heard exactly that sentence from my brother over the phone 20 years ago.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So I think I can fully relate to what's happening. Yeah.
Yeah. It's one of those things that your world just goes like, it's like.
Well, I was it was weird. I was lying on a bed listening to an audiobook of The Hobbit. Mm-hmm. And my father had read that to my brother and me when we were little. Yeah. I hadn't touched The Hobbit since. Right. So that was weird synchronicity. And then my brother called, and we had this deal that we would only speak to one another if we had something positive to say, because we discovered that we were only lamenting over the phone. Right. So we said, okay, only positive stuff. He calls, and I had something super happy to share because I was in a relationship, and he says, did Mama call? And I said, no. And which was weird because they were on holidays and they would never call her when they were on holidays. And then the next sentence was exactly the same sentence: Puppy's dead. Wow. And I remember standing up suddenly. I don't know how I got into that position from lying down. I could see black and white, only black and whites for suddenly. I screamed at him that that's not possible, that he should stop making fun of me. Went to the toilet and threw up.
Wow.
So yeah, that's happening for me in that moment. Yeah. Okay.
No, it's devastating.
Yeah. It is.
Oh, so obviously that said, I was like, okay, I'm an associate partner in this firm.
Mm.
I looked around and I said, I don't want to be any of these partners. I don't want to have the life that any of these partners have.
Mm.
And so that was 2004. So I was about, I guess, 36 years old. And it's kind of like, ooh, okay. It's as you get older, you have this mental block that, starting again, it's a little bit more difficult. So I decided to move back to Spain because I lived in Spain from after a couple of years in New York after Citibank, and just had an amazing time and loved it. And and I moved back to Spain, and I said, okay, I was doing some consulting work because I did build up a lot of good consulting skills, so it was easy to like have a good good amount of money coming in as mid-30s, and like partying and all this stuff with the low cost base in Spain at that point in time also. And got back into the entrepreneurial thing, and ended up investing in a couple different companies. And then I started an animation company with some guys that have been in the animation business in Colombia. And not only was it an animation company, but we're building entertainment brands and doing a bunch of different things, very innovative stuff. And I'm like, if these guys were in the Bay Area, they would freaking kill it. And because it's just really good, really good. And we ended up setting up this business, produced this animated series, sold it all over the world. We then got into negotiations with Televisa. Televisa wanted to buy us. And it was not an easy negotiation, but it was like, okay, this is going to be good. Again, good paper money. And then 24 hours before we have to sign the deal, we get change of deal terms, and it was like, we can't sign this deal. And financially, we're so strapped. And I put in a lot of money and brought in some of my family money, and it was like, this thing is just going to blow up. And I just had probably the lowest point in my life. And my partner and I were just at war with each other, because I said, like, we gotta just wind this thing down. There's no resource. I mean, it's just, we gotta wind this thing down, sell the assets, pay the debts, and just call it a day. And he's like, no, I'm gonna fight till it's dead. I'm like, yeah, because you didn't put in the money. So anyways, long story short, I jettisoned out. He kept on pushing until he crashed. And what I go back and I was in a depression at that point in time. I had a son that had been born, because this was roughly 2013. And my first son had been born, and I just remember just looking at my son on the ground, 9 months old, and with tears in my eyes, saying, how am I going to provide for this child? It's like, how am I going to do this? And I go back to my entire legacy. I'm supposed to be an entrepreneur. I'm a Jewish guy that's supposed to be really good business and make money. It's like, what's going on here? And basically, I ended up doing different consulting work and different things. And eventually, I reconnected, and then some other investments that started to work nicely. And then I met I met Nico Alcalá, that you met at Kindernet, and he and his partner asked me to become a sort of a founding partner for Feature Lighthouse, for the VR studio. And we had a tremendous run. I mean, we just ended up being probably one of the top 10 storytelling VR studios, selling $1 million projects to Oculus and Facebook. It's like, we were doing groundbreaking stuff. And we then went into the financing part, and it was just brutal because we were maybe a year late in the funding cycle for VR studios. So everybody loved what we did, but they didn't want to give us any money. And I found myself once again in a situation saying, we're running out of cash. This thing is gonna blow up. And I was like, I can't deal with another failure because I was tagging it as a failure. And so I had in 2015, I like came across, a friend of mine said, you have to watch this Vice documentary on this crazy Dutch guy called Wim Hof, the Iceman. And I watched this video and I was captivated by it. I don't know why. And I found fascinating, not only the stuff that he did with the cold and the breathing, but the fact that in a laboratory, he was injected with a dead variant of E. coli and was able to neutralize the impact of the bacteria in his body. So I started like looking into this. And then I said, you know, this must be some type of farce or something weird. And I Googled Wim Hof fraud, Wim Hof spoof, didn't find anything negative. And I started to find these testimonial videos of this woman in the Philharmonic Orchestra in Amsterdam that had MS and couldn't play the violin, and through the method was able to get back to play the violin, and a guy with Parkinson's that turned around his Parkinson's deterioration with it. So I'm like, oh, you know what, I'm going to do this 10-week online course. It's $200. And the first time I did the breathing, I was like, what the hell is this? I mean, my entire body was just electric. So, and that started to really reduce stress, and there's just a lot of things. And towards the end of I guess 2017, like when we're going into this really tough part, we had 5 productions going on at the same time. I had brought, you know, Robert Englund, Freddy Krueger to Spain to shoot in the forest for like 2 weeks. And so we'd gone to the Venice Film Festival. We had 3 pieces in the Biennale. And coming back from that, it's like, okay, these Chinese investors are not going to pull through. We've talked to everybody else. We got to start bringing the ship home somehow. And I was like, but I need oxygen. I need to take a break. So I signed up for this 5-day winter retreat with Wim in Poland. And I'm like, let's go. I need to do something very different to clear my head. And it was a mind-blowing experience. There's a lot of things to unpack in there, but the signature moment was on the 4th day. We went to do the climb of Mount Snieżka in shorts. And I found myself at the top of Mount Snieżka, minus 25 degrees Celsius, in shorts, in a snowstorm, and I felt warm. And I was like, this can't be. It's like, clearly, it's like freaking cold out here. And I realized how cold it was because I was taking a bunch of pictures because it was just a very surreal scene. And when I finished taking pictures, my fingers didn't work for me to zip up my jacket. Like I couldn't, I was like, I think I better get inside now.
Yeah.
But the reflection was, what is cold? Clearly it's a physical reality. But cold gets created in our brain. All it is information from the skin, from thermal sensors that go to our brain, and we had trained how to shift that immediate interpretation. And I said, what if I went back to Madrid and instead of Future Lighthouse being a failure, yet another business failure, I turned the wind down of this business into a massive success. And I was super energized by that idea. And then I came back, and it was not easy, but we finished the productions, we wound down, we negotiated with the vendors, amazing dynamic with the team. It's like, it was very tough conversations with all the employees, as you have to let them go. And I'm like, it's like everybody was almost everybody was absolutely awesome in the process. So once we wound that down, I said, okay, I want to take some time because I'm now getting close to 50. And the way I've done things in the past have really not worked out. And I need to sort of realize that I need to do things differently now. So I went into this journey of exploration that I sort of labeled it as sort of the hardware and software upgrade of my body, mind, body, and soul for the next 50 years of life. So I rationalized it saying, okay, from the time I graduated from college to 50, it's about 30 years. And if I can re-engineer and retool everything, from now till 80, I have another 30 years. I have the same amount of time that I had from college till now for a second chance. With capital, with network, with more experience. So if I can crack the nut, I've got a second go at this. And I had done another Wim Hof thing in Iceland. And coming out of that, I sort of said, okay, I'm going to die at 100 or more. I just set that. So I have 50 years. So I really need to make these 50 years count. Obviously, I can't control that, but just the mindset shift was different. And I came across Mind Valley. I ended up doing all sorts of different things. And basically, fast forward 3 to 4 years, and along that process, and especially during COVID, I sort of realized, wait a second, I have a calling here to do something, to take what I've learned and what exists in a lot of wisdom things and bring it to people, share this experience. And earlier this year, it all sort of clicked because I came across this thing called the Gene Keys. I don't know if you've ever heard about the Gene Keys. Yeah. And as I started to work through that, and alongside this, the holistic visions, obviously, you know, the Gene Keys, your holistic visions. And then with holistic visions, I said, whoa, this is an entire rewiring of everything and a lot of self-discovery. And as I was diving into the Gene Keys, the first one was oppression, challenge. It's like, I am supposed to be slapped by difficulty and challenge. That's my shadow. To then realize that the gift is to thrive in the chaos, to thrive in the challenge, to not let the challenge overwhelm you. So as I read that, I'm like, okay, on the business front, even though some things worked well, the overall balance has been challenged and a lot of like getting punched in the face. And I never enjoyed it. And then on the other side, I'm like, throw me in an ice bath and I'm in bliss. Put me on a mountain half naked and massive discomfort, and I get the surge of energy. And that's when I realized, wait a second, that is thriving in the challenge. How do I then bring that into this other side? So basically, through COVID, I just spent a lot of time thinking about all of the different things that I've explored, all the different books, all the different methods, and then sort of cobbled it together into a new direction, which is around this resilient leadership, on how to tap these innate neurological and physiological capabilities that we all have, except they're dormant because of the way we live and the way we've been educated. And as I was diving deeper into the Gene Keys, it was like, that is my mission. It is sharing that with other people. And that's when, for the first time in my life, I started to feel what you mentioned at the beginning, which is life streaming through me. That's when I realized, wait a second, I don't have to prove anything to anybody. And I don't have to prove anything to myself. All I have to do is honor my path. And that's kind of like a conversation with me and a higher energy. I don't even know what to call it. And as long as I'm honoring that path and constantly growing, and then just things literally started to appear and unfold. So I just called it the great unfolding. It's just, I just need to let it happen and make sure that I'm honoring the pathway that I'm supposed to be at, which is a radically different way of the way I lived my past 50 years of life. So suddenly, it's the convergence of things that are supporting this journey, which will have its own challenges. But now I know that the challenges are there to grow me. They're not bad. They're actually there to keep me toned. So to answer the second question, which is directly related, how do I make the world a better place? By making leaders better people. By showing people that are in positions of influence, either in business or in any field, that they have these capabilities inside of them to be better at what they do and also to be better people in the process. And through that, kind of create a little bit of a ripple effect in their organizations and the people that they touch, starting with themselves and expanding out to their families, their friends, and their businesses. So to wrap up, for a very long time, I was always looking for a purpose. And I called it the purple frog. I need to find the purple frog in the Amazon forest that I'm supposed to save. But that purple frog never appeared. And it wasn't until I realized that, wait a second, that is my purple frog. That is my purpose. My purpose is at a higher level. We know this from the gene keys and the holistic visions, is living in alignment with that soul evolution and the higher purpose of what your soul needs to learn during this time on the planet, and then share that learning, not as mine. It's not like I have the Stephen Posner method that's going to change your life. It's like, no, there's amazing things out there. What I've been able to do is pull together different bits and structure them and pull them together on a personalized basis or on a group basis to then use those tools in order to further whatever path different individuals are on. So it basically is, I make the world a better place by making people better people.
Okay. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. That's so there's several things that came up for me while you were talking, but I want to go into one first, which is, and I see both in you. When I a while ago, I helped a young lady with her master thesis, and the thesis was about is it possible to specifically increase an adult's mindset complexity? And does mindset complexity an increase in mindset complexity equal, or is that positively correlated with more sustainable behavior? And then thirdly, is that possible to scale it up? Right. So she did a baseline test with an institute that is all about leadership and measuring mindset complexity and things like that. And then she had interviews with the people that were part of this study, structured individually and in groups and all of it. And what emerged out of that was that curiosity is the leading force for people to evolve into a more complex mindset. But there are two modes of curiosity. One is a childlike, open curiosity, explorative by nature, right? And only one out of, 25 participants was of that kind. Everybody else was of the kind of what I would call forced curiosity. So you're dropped into a crisis, and in order to get out of the crisis, you have to become curious about the ways out to solve that crisis, right? You don't call it curiosity in that moment, but effectively it is, right? You have to become stepping through, or have to find ways of stepping through the boundaries of what used to be your comfort zone and is now uncomfort, into something that is a new comfort, but used to be probably your discomfort. Right. So, and I see both in you, right? And that raises the question: is there a way to reactivate childlike curiosity? Because what we want to avoid is suffering. You don't want to push people into deliberately into suffering, so that they're in a forced curiosity moment. That is the hero's journey path, things like that, right? They definitely work, but can we somehow reactivate childlike curiosity in order to achieve the same goal? Or do you totally disagree with what I'm saying?
No, I totally agree with what you're saying, and a lot of things come up. Very recently, as I've been digging, learning more, especially as just the unfolding of all the insights from the Gene Keys type work. And because my way of being was so radically different than it is now, and it might be different in the future, right now it just fits, is I actually sort of feel that I'm in kindergarten and I've learned that there's an alphabet.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how to read yet, but I realize that you pull all of these things together and that makes words, and words make language, and then language makes books, and language, except it's at a very different plane. And a lot of it has to do with less mental, more sensing skills, more heart, more intuition, and be able to balance that, be able to really build up your ability to intuit things, to feel things, to feel energies. And I think by default, that is a childlike state, because a child is not processing intellectually. They're feeling their way through the world a lot more. And then eventually, as they get older, they start bringing in the mind. It's interesting because this morning I'm in the deep dive of the Venus sequence in the Gene Keys, and I was actually talking about the 7-year cycle of the first 7 years, the next 7, and the following 7. And it was interesting because it talked about that in the first 7 years, that's actually where the spiritual body, the spiritual quotient gets kind of locked in. Then you go into the emotional quotient, which goes into the teen years. And then you get the intellectual as you get sort of in the later teens into the early late teens and early 20s. So I think that childlike aspect has to do with learning how to move out from mental processing. So already just thinking about mindset is already constraining the framework of the question that perhaps you should be asking, because it's putting people into the mind. Because as you start to step into the feeling and the sensing of stuff, it is more playful. So I've done it 4 times. I started surfing lessons. And what's fascinating about surfing is that you can't think. You have to feel. You have to sense the waves. And then there's a moment that says, go, 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 go. And it's a sport where it's all, or an activity that's all about feeling, about being in tune with your body, with the environment. And that's a way to build up that sensing skill. And that same skill is actually very relevant for business, because right now there's so much uncertainty, so much disruption, so much stuff, and you can have contradictory information to rationalize absolutely any decision. So what's the wave that you should catch? Because you're going to find any information to support any decision you want. At one point, you need to move out of the mental model and say, okay, based on my experience, what feels right? I see that coming. That's the way to go, and lean into it. So I do believe that it is a trainable skill. It is a capability. And where this also connects to the type of learning that I've had in the work that I do is that one of the things that betrays us to a certain degree is what has enabled us to survive over hundreds of thousands of years and millions of years as species, which is the nervous system. And so the degree to which you're stuck in a fear response, it shuts down cognitive function and goes into survival mode. When you are in sort of rest recovery, parasympathetic, that's when more creativity can happen. So when you're in the stress response, your field of vision narrows. If you're a man, if you're a woman, it opens up to be able to like make sure there's no creatures coming out of the bushes. But with a man, you're like, I need to keep the eye on that saber-toothed tiger. I'm not worried about that other stuff. So things like the Wim Hof method and breath work and other things allow you to start to build mastery over the nervous system. So it's kind of a lot of these issues that people have with stress is it's the way we're wired. Now, you don't have to be wired. So you mentioned about we don't want people to, and I'm going around a bunch of stuff. We don't want people to struggle, to suffer. And again, one of the interesting things from last week from the Gene Keys was saying life is struggle. Suffering is optional.
Okay.
So there will be challenge always, sometimes less, sometimes more. It is your attitude and the quality of your consciousness that you come into. So you can have that curiosity in survival mode, or you can have that curiosity saying, whoa, here's an opportunity to learn something new. Here's an opportunity to crack this nut. Except our fear system is so engaged as if we were going to die. Like I thought I was going to die when my businesses were dying. And it's like, no. So that's
not my business. So I'm going to end in a question. I'm going to unpack some of that into my language to see if I understood correctly. So I fully agree with the notion of being more in the what I call the soul set. So with a mindset shift, there has to be a soul set shift, which is all about feeling. And I love my mother's definition of soul. I was just she is in the process of leaving right now, and we had a conversation 2 weeks ago where she said, I asked her about insights, right? Deep insights that you have that are like, and I use that same image as you used, like learning how to read, right? Once you learn how to read, it's unlearnable, but it changes your entire perspective on the world.
Right.
And I love the way you were describing it, that what you're experiencing is increasing the literacy of the world in an entirely new way that you don't really have language for, right? Yet, or nobody really has language for yet, and which maybe cannot have language at all. It can just be felt, right?
Yes.
So what she said was, asked about these insights, and she said, well, she's having one right now, and that insight was that there is a deep interconnection between the body, the soul, and the mind.
Right.
As her body is rapidly fading, she says she said she could sense that her mind and her soul are also fading. And so I asked her, so what is the soul for you then? And she had the most precise, clear answer for me that I've ever heard about that question. She said, the soul is for feelings, what the mind is for thoughts. And that really, well, there's this, for me, there's no more precise way to say it.
Yes.
And that loops back into what you said about childhood. So in the first 7 years, it appears we're filling our subconscious with heuristics that give us really fast responses, to use Daniel Kahneman's system, filling system 1 for fast thinking, that allows us to respond quickly in the world. And sometimes those heuristics are a little bit off, but most of the time they're good enough to keep us alive. Unless the world is changing at the rapid pace it is right now, and the slow evolution of the 7-year heuristics teaching the next 7-year heuristics 20 years later just isn't enough to increase the soul set shift quickly enough to fit the notion that we, or the moment that we have to face now, which means that we have to learn. One thing we have to do, and I think that's at the core of it, have to learn how to trust intuition. You use that word. And it took me a long time to get into a mode of being able to actually trust my intuition. So what is your thinking around that? How can we learn how to trust intuition?
It's an amazing question. I mean, I really think it's an amazing question, and it's not easy to answer. And I'm in the process of trying to figure
Let's
it out.
explore it. Let's explore it.
So let me ramble a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
One of the things that I did in my transformation journey was I said, okay, everyone's always asking, what are you going to do?
Mm-hmm.
Like when you're a kid, what do you want to do when you grow up? It's like, what do you do when you're a cocktail party, especially in the United States? Is, hi, Thomas, nice to meet you. What do you do?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know why I had this idea saying, okay, at the moment of death, it's going to be a moment in the now. So obviously you can't really think about the future because you're about to die. All of the past and anything that happened doesn't really matter because it is like the way you're feeling right now. It is in the now, except you know that this is about to happen. So I said, how do I want to feel in that moment right before I'm going to go? So rather than thinking, what do I want to do and accomplish in my life? How do I want to feel about the life that I lived? And then I bring in my consultant mental hat. I said, okay, I compartmentalized my life into 8 areas: my body, my mind, my soul, my emotional world, my relationships, my physical environment, my home, where I work, my finances, my career, and my bucket of sort of hobby and adventure. And rather than thinking about what do I want to do in these areas, I spent a lot of time thinking about how do I want to feel in these areas. So when I think about my body, I want to feel strong. I want to feel flexible. I want to feel immunity. As I think about my mind, I want to feel vision. I want to feel clarity. I want to feel peace of mind. The emotional side was always a little bit more difficult because I'm like, how do I wrap around it? But one of it was just in my space. Peace of mind. It's like grounded. That's be able to feel things intensely, but feel the grounded nature of it. So as I started to paint that picture, it has laid somewhat of foundation about what intuitively feels right and wrong, because I understand the feeling states that I know for me, because of the work that I've done, are in alignment with how I want to live my life. So rather than intuition just being a pure A/B, which that can be another thing, just pure A/B thing, it's kind of being able to quickly check into yourselves as how does this make me feel? And is that feeling aligned with this pathway? And if it is, go. And if it isn't, don't.
And what if it's unclear?
So what I'm saying is that if you can clarify the underpinning of the feeling states that you want to drive your life, and they resonate, so there's a truth to them, then there's more things for the intuition to hang on to, versus it just being a B, right? And then I do think there's this part of actually training your intuition. Go out for a walk and don't plan where you're going. And just kind of get to a corner and say, do I go left or right? It's feeling like left, go left.
So in my experience, or the way I see feelings is that a feeling is a pointer to a massively complex computation. And this is also why it's a feeling, another word.
Yeah.
And the problem with that is that sometimes the computation itself is flawed.
Yeah.
Sometimes the information used by the computation is flawed or not sufficient.
Right. Right.
And this is why I noticed I cannot or couldn't always trust my intuition.
Right.
So in addition to what you just said, I would add that maybe it's important to notice that you are unclear.
Yes.
And then turn into a loop between embodiment, mind, and feeling.
Yes.
Where you take the so the missing clarity as a signal for your mind to think, how do I fill the gaps?
Right.
How do I adjust algorithms?
Right.
How can I test all of that? And then signal that to the body to please go out into the world for some action, to run these tests, to deepen the information density in your feeling space, so that the feeling gets more clarified.
Yes.
And then, I mean, that's circle one. Circle two is try to get your biases out of that.
Yeah.
That's even harder. So that's level two. But so that was, and what I don't understand, and maybe you have some ideas on this, is how does that loop start? What's the chicken and what's the egg in this?
So does it matter, to answer the question, what's the chicken and what's the egg, versus just understanding the dynamic that is at play?
It matters if you want to help other people initiate that loop.
Okay, so so something that immediately comes to mind also, so you understand how I start to see the world.
Yeah.
I read this amazing book by this woman called Lisa Feldman Barrett, called How Emotions Are Made. I don't know if you've come across it.
No.
So it's How Emotions Are Made, The Secret Life of the Brain. What she's doing in the field of emotional science is equivalent to Einstein overturning Newtonian physics, radically shifting the understanding of how emotions think. And you'll see how this connects. Previously, emotions were seen as something that there's fingerprints in the body, your amygdala gets triggered, there's fear, and it just creates all this stuff. What her theory and what she's demonstrating, and it's being picked up by a lot of other neuroscientists, is that the brain is actually constantly predicting and projecting onto the world based on past experience, especially in the field, or not especially, and also in the field of emotions. So when emotions feel like responses to situations, because they're so fast, because they go through the fastest neural pathways, but they're actually the brain projecting onto a situation and then confirming whether that's appropriate or that is not appropriate. So the first thing is to realize, wait a second, we're constantly creating our reality, both in terms of what we see, what we interpret, and then what we feel in this black box that is this brain. And one of the biggest limitations that we have is that we have a very unsophisticated or very limited language to be able to tag feelings and emotions. So you've probably heard this study that was done. I'll make the connection of the Himba tribe in Namibia. That they can't really see the color blue because there isn't the word blue in their language, but there's so many variants of green that they can see shades of green that you and I could not distinguish. And they had scientists that went out to test it. So the more we grow our sophistication of emotional concepts, the easier it is to see them in the world. One funny example is, and I don't think a word exists in definitely not in English, and definitely not in German. When I describe it, you'll kind of understand what I mean, but you will also know that, wait a second, I can't identify that emotion immediately because I don't have a word to describe it yet, which is in Japanese, and I don't remember the exact word, there is a specific word that captures the feeling, the emotion of not being happy with your haircut. It's one word. And it nails it. It's like you say this word and it's like, I've got this. Or in German, you've got Schadenfreude. I mean, that concept in English doesn't exist, but in German, that feeling state of like enjoying another person's misfortune is crystal clear. So part of it, of this circuit, is also building our dictionary and our language so that we're actually able to see things in our lives and in our world that we don't see. But this is never part of any educational program. This is just kind of let life teach you. But imagine if it was. Imagine it's like, okay, we need, by age 7, you need to expand the amount of emotional states beyond sad, happy, frustrated, exhilarated, thrilled, so that you're able to build your sophistication in feeling and understanding feeling. So I think part of the challenges with all of this is that this is never seen as an important part of development at a second level of depth. I mean, you saw it in Brain Matters. Social emotional learning is very important, but it's very basic the way it's taught. And in high school, they're not teaching you, hey, wait a second, one of the powers to unlock your states is to build your sophistication in this so you can start to see in the world different things and be able to tag it and name it. And that then brings in the mental loop, because then you understand it. And then you're playing with, the spectrum, which I love. And when you mix both, is the understanding and the knowing. There's certain things that you understand, and there's certain things that you know. And know is like your mother said, that is the feeling. It's like, it's right.
Mm-hmm. Okay, brings up a lot of things for me. One of them is the notion of knowing, as described by John Vervaeke. So he sees 4 distinct ways of knowing the world, and some of them are, one of them is objectifiable, but most of them aren't.
Right.
So he says there is propositional knowing.
Yeah.
This is what we're mostly basing our so our current interpretation of what knowing actually is propositional knowing.
Right.
That's what you just called understanding.
Yeah.
What you could call knowing for him has more like just 3 aspects. One is procedural knowing.
Mm-hmm.
So you know how to do a thing.
Right.
You don't necessarily know why or how it actually works, but you know how to do it.
Yeah.
One of them is participatory knowing, which is very adjacent to procedural, but it's even more embedded, right? You're even more embodied in the action, right? You can totally feel it, but it's right. That's the more the instinctual level. And then there's perspectival knowing, right? Understanding that there are multiple perspectives to take, and knowing the perspective you're in. So elevating yourself out of your default system state and choosing which state you're looking at a situation from. Now, these kinds of knowing, or the whole bucket you call knowing, are highly subjective.
Yes.
And so and it's also I see this as a kind of a triangulation, right? So if you're in here now, then and you're acting on this plane of the here now, then this can basically be omnidirectional, right? It doesn't matter in the total beingness how that plane is situated, unless you have a place, right, that you measure against.
Yes.
And a place could be called purpose.
Yes.
Now, what's your take on the purpose in portion of this? Because if everybody follows a different purpose,
Mhm.
then everybody's plane can be shifted in a different way, and it is really hard to relate.
Right.
But if there's some congruency in the purpose, then it's easier to align our planes so that we're actually doing the
Right.
something similar, something coherent.
Right.
So what, I'm curious, what comes up for you when
So what comes, a bunch of things. More immediately, and again, I feel like I'm relying too much on it, but I loved in the Gene Keys journey about distinguishing between purpose and higher purpose.
Mm-hmm.
So one generally, and I always thought about purpose of like, what am I supposed to do on the planet?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the learning from the Gene Keys is the higher purpose is really about the quality of your consciousness and your alignment with sort of what is a truth and what is your essence, and essentially being in alignment with what your soul is supposed to do during this lifetime as its pathway of growth.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully they're complementary things, but they could be very divergent. I mean, I've been working hard without realizing it that I'm actually trying to converge these things so that my professional purpose is actually very aligned with this higher purpose that has less to do with what I do, but it has everything to do with how I do what I do, how I show up, and how I interact. So if we're having the conversation and say, well, let's bring it into the higher purpose, it is wonderful for all of us to have very different higher purposes, because we should. We don't all need to have the same higher purpose. We all need to be unfolding on our own pathways. And then the combinations, as in you interact with people, just creates this great dynamic of helping everybody evolve. And in the end, that does become, for me, a unifying purpose, which is saying we have to create the space for everyone to be able to evolve their soul while they're on the planet and leave the planet a better place than when you found it. So you could actually have a singular purpose as a species, as a race, that creates so much space inside of it to have tremendous diversity, because I do think all of this knowing is highly subjective. And I also think it should be highly subjective because it is your world. The question is, how tainted is it? Is it your worldview? Is it spinning towards the dark, or is it spinning towards a light? Are you operating from a shadow, or are you operating from a higher level?
So what I heard you say is that if you find alignment between purpose and higher purpose, so with your how you show up and what you do, then that alignment points towards the same why in all humans because of our humanness.
Yes.
And so there's a higher purpose, a meta purpose, which is common to the entire species. Okay, well that maps onto my planes, right? So that makes a lot of sense to me. So in that sense, the how, what are on the plane, and the why is the meta purpose. Okay. So when I have conversations with people around the world, different demographic backgrounds, everywhere, basically, India, Africa, Americas, Europe, all ages, and I ask them, So if you could like just snap and create a world you would like to live in, love to live in, what would that look like? I get a pretty uniform answer from hundreds of people I've had that conversation with, and in a structured format. So I what you're saying totally resonates with me. Now, that image that everybody's describing is far off from how everybody's living, almost everybody. And only those who have reached a level of sovereignty, and sovereignty on multiple levels. So what I would call physical sovereignty. They are somewhat independent of the economic needs that almost everybody is dependent on. Mental sovereignty. They can actually do some real thinking instead of simulated thinking. And emotional sovereignty, right? Be in tune with your feelings and understand your feelings as a valuable information system, and not as a ruler that you have to follow, right? So not a very few people I know have the luxury of being sovereign on all these three levels. But what I observe is that in order to actively start creating that kind of world that everybody seems to be dreaming of, and that is the big why, we need to create more sovereignty. So how do you think about that? What comes up for you for that?
So a bunch of different things. If you ask me, and I would have answered this again very differently just a few months ago, and you asked me, what is your ideal world that you would want to live in? I would say the one we currently have, with all the shit it has. And they said, why? Because there's an opportunity to fix it. And with the opportunity to fix it, there's so much growth. And again, it's this mindset that row into the challenge, because the challenge is there to grow you. Obviously, there's a massive list, but I believe that it is so much more productive to reframe all the shit that we see in the world as opportunity, versus, fantasizing too much about utopian things, because I do feel that struggle is part of the equation. We can build this utopian society, and then we'll find something else to struggle within that utopian society, because we're not addressing the underlying issue, which is we're all here to grow our souls, and the struggle that we go through is part of the training ground. So what immediately really comes up is that in the past, I would have gone into, sort of painting this idyllic thing. And now it's kind of like saying, wait a second. If we construct reality in our brains, we can start to shift of how we see the world, and start to see the opportunities that actually lie behind all of the challenges that face us. And they are massive. And it's so easy to be unbelievably cynical. And it's not that I'm very optimistic about the future evolution of the planet and us as a species, but I'm optimistic about the opportunity if people wake up to the opportunity. And I see a lot of things that make me excited about that, and then a bunch of other things that make me realize, wait a second, this is going even further away from that direction. So, for example, I do think that that what is represented in the decentralization through blockchain technology is a massive paradigm shift. There's a video that I saw that I There's this channel that you might be familiar with on YouTube called Kruzigats. It's got these beautiful animations. There's one called The Egg. I don't know if you've ever seen it. I'll send it to you. I mean, and I watch it with my kids, and they do all sorts of wacky questions. Was like, if you're King Midas and you fell on the ground and you touched the earth, what happened if the entire earth turned to gold? And it goes into the physics of what would actually happen if everything turned into gold from a mass perspective. But there was this one video called Emergence, how stupid things become smart together. And it's playing with the concept of emergence. And it goes into ants. An ant, an individual ant, is a stupid thing. But an ant colony is an unbelievably sophisticated thing. And even though there is a queen, there's self-regulating mechanisms within the organism of the colony that allows it to thrive. And I think how we're stepping into a blockchain-based system and a decentralized system, I wonder if it is the natural law of emergence starting to play out through technology with the human species. So suddenly things that are way more powerful and sustainable can actually start to overturn some of the structures. And I think that's why you get, some, Bitcoin maximalists and other folks that are see such a revolution and such a lifeboat. Because if you can change the nature of money and change that playing field, then you can start to create a sense of financial sovereignty. And if you can start to create financial sovereignty on a global basis, then you start to change the equation of everything else. I mean, I'm not sure if I go all the way down that pathway, but to me, the sovereignty question, and I love the way you framed it, because I think there's multiple aspects. And I guess the one that my sphere is, and I mentioned it, the holistic visions, is try to help people realize that you can free yourself a little bit more from your own mental slavery. I think that just becoming aware of the lack of sovereignty that we have in our own thinking, because we're so trapped in our own mental models, is what keeps that box tight. So if you can start to just question it, you already start to expand it.
Very interesting. I think that is something that seems to happen when you push your body into states, right? You mentioned standing on that summit, minus 25 degrees, being surprised, right? So your experience proved to you that your interpretation of the world up to then was not correct, right? And that is a deep insight, right? That that is comparable to me to the insight of learning how to read. Or as you talk about crypto and tokenization, the insight that money is not God-given, right? I have to say, until 2003, I never questioned that where money actually came from, right? Until some high priests of finance taught me how this happens. But it's embarrassing in hindsight that I never questioned that, right? So, but like every insight, it's kind of embarrassing afterwards, right? And I would add to that. There are two threads here. I want to touch on the first one before we go into distributed nature of things, maybe. You said that there's kind of like a pulsing between going from a comfort into discomfort to comfort to discomfort, and that is the root of life. I would even argue, because the first cell was trying to maintain some sort of balance between the internal and the external, right? Ingesting entropy, sorting it out, ingesting more entropy, sorting it out, And if it stops doing that, it's dead.
Yeah.
So on a holistic perspective of beingness, I would say that stopping the move from comfort to discomfort and so on is the equivalent of the cell dying, but your beingness dying. Now the conditions of that are multifold, right? So one is that you can physically afford that.
Right.
Another one is that you can emotionally afford that. So next to having the more or fully distributed access to signaling power by not having fiat accumulate in a couple of hands, but having a truly distributed money supply that everybody has a signaling power to show what you actually need. I see something else, which is unconditional love.
Mm-hmm.
That basically allowing a person, as he or she goes from the understanding that something is wrong into the valley of despair,
Mm-hmm.
and then going out of the valley of despair back into a higher state of understanding or knowing, and keeping the space for that person in the valley of despair.
Right.
And that's what you need unconditional love for, because you don't know how long it'll take. You don't know at what end the people will come out. You cannot set conditions for your love of what their learning experience will be. And I think that's a crucial element. And I also agree that, to paraphrase my friend Indy Johar, saying that the granularity of the human mind is infinite, meaning even if we grow to a high level of sophistication in all of this, we're still on an objective scale. There's on an absolute scale, there's the differences become minute, right? But on a subjective relative scale, our challenges always stay the same.
Yeah.
Right. So and I think there's something to be found there, that, and I have no idea how to put that into words.
Right.
But there's something to be found there that also maps on the distributed nature of
Right.
what you were describing, and putting all of that together might actually be the foundational patterns of a new paradigm that can actually save our asses.
Right.
But again, I'm at a loss to describe what that looks like.
Yeah. No, I'm at a loss too on how to describe it, because like everything, all of this technology, all this stuff is a tool, and it can be used in really good ways, or it could be used in really negative ways.
Mm-hmm.
And there's, when money comes into the equation, I think there's more of a tendency to use it in negative ways than positive ways. So how that kind of evolves.
Do you have a theory on why that is?
I think it goes back to this survivalist, materialist view, which is I've got to protect myself, my loved ones, and that requires accumulation, because accumulation is what and then give back a little bit here and there. But it isn't something else that I thought about a lot out of the holistic visions. It's just the whole concept of reciprocity, that when you get something, you got to give back just to keep the energetics flowing. And that made me really rethink the way you see thankfulness and gratitude. Say, thank you very much. Well, what are you going to do about it? How are you going to show thankfulness, not just say it? So I think in the concept of money, it's kind of like, okay, how do you keep the energetics so that it flows, so that the prosperity builds and expands? And part of it, I think requires such a fundamental shift in core belief systems and mindsets on which all of this society is built on. So, and shifting that, God knows, but I remember in our group within health and holistic visions, you know, I was telling the folks saying, wait a second, if we all within this group agree that this is an embodied experience for our soul, that there is something for us to do on this planet that will evolve our soul, then we don't have to fear death that much. Because death is just a gateway into the next cycle. The purpose of death is to make sure you're playing the game as best as you can while you're here. So death is a reminder of play correctly versus, oh shit, it's going to end. And if that was the core belief of our society, then we can reframe all of health-related issues so that they're not connected to a fear of death, but they're connected to something else that you need to learn and grow from, whatever illness or ailment that you have. So if you take it into the sphere of money, and then you realize, wait a second, it's not just about how much you accumulate during this lifetime, because the purpose of you being on the planet is something else than what you think it is. And if you connect with it, then the fact that you've accumulated money allows you to expand that purpose and radiate out to help the entire, you know, human race. So how we get as the 8 billion people to think that we're all in the same lifeboat and we must take care of each other as we take care of ourselves is a gargantuan thing. Maybe it takes a pandemic that actually kills 50% of the population. Cut across social strata, education, background, you can't escape it. And maybe that will kind of say, okay, the 50% of us that are left, we got to play by different rules, folks. We all agree, because we've all lost. I don't know if that's what it would take.
I have a similar interpretation. Yes. So we're all aware of boom bust cycles. You mentioned the 2000s boom bust and the bubble bursting. But boom busts are very common in nature, right?
Right.
If a predator has the ability to exploit its environment, it will, until that environment is exploited, and then its own population will first grow and then drop. And human civilizations have done that over and over again in the past, and but they've done that locally contained. Now we have an incredible success story for the last couple of hundred years, growing from a couple of 100 million to almost 8 billion. And this curve looks exactly like any other boom bust curve. And we're at one point, and this is what we're talking about, this is what we're feeling, this is what the bubble we are part of is exploring, is there a possibility to not go into the bust mode? Because going into the bust mode, like nature usually does it, will mean that there's a couple of 100 million people left in about 100 years.
True.
And there's no way around that. If we continue the way we do, we've exploited, as the apex predator of the planet, we've exploited the planet on a planetary scale for the first time. This is gonna hit us. So now the question is, is there a mode of being that repairs that and allows us to still thrive as a species? I would say yes, there is. Then the next question is, how do we get there? And is this a mode that can be activated through activity right now, or do we need to have this Thanos moment that you were talking about, like, or maybe not 50% of the population, but some cities dying due to overheating and power failures, which is a pretty likely scenario.
Yeah.
Will this be enough of a trigger to allow us to move into that mode?
Right.
And I somehow get the sense that you're definitely working on this, right? So somehow I get the sense that the work you're doing points towards helping people to be able to afford the love that they have to give to others, so that this can actually spread.
Yeah.
So of helping them to become self-sufficient, self-reliant in their aspects of life. So as they are leaders, they clearly somewhat sovereign on the physical domain. So helping them to free themselves on the others affords love that they can then give to others. Do I interpret that correctly?
No, I think absolutely. Let me just pause a second, because I see my wife coming. There's a guy that came to deliver wood. Can we just pause 1 minute?
No problem. Go ahead.
A second. How much did you have? 500 kilos. How much is 500 kilos? 70 kilos. No, how much wood is this going to take? I think it should. What this guy, like, what's there, like that little bit, is 20 kilos. This is a part of the fun of Portugal, that delivery times are always fluid.
Well, that's
firewood was supposed to come last night at 5, and it's suddenly arriving at 1:30. But
as long as you still have some firewood left, that's okay.
yeah, exactly. So apologies for that.
Don't worry. So the point was, I think your work is, as I understand it, you're creating the circumstances for other people to be able to afford to give love.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. I may be, I'm operating with a Trojan horse, and I'm not talking about the giving love, and I'm not using those words in that language. But at the end of the day, underneath it all, that is what it's about. And it starts with sort of like self-love and giving yourself permission to see your limitations, embrace them, overcome them, and radiate out from there. I work with this mentor, and it's very interesting because he's very contrary in a lot of different things. And he's also very spiritually connected. So it's very interesting to have conversations with him. And he's very funny about this whole save the planet narrative, because he's like, yeah, you get all these tree huggers. They go hug a tree. Do you think they ever ask permission? Does the tree want to get hugged? It's like, we got totally the wrong relationship with nature. Do you think Mother Nature is actually worried? It's like, she's been around for billions of years, will be around for a billion more. Humans could do whatever they want to the planet, and the species can be wiped out, and an entire new species can emerge. And the human era was just like a rounding error in the spectrum of time. It says, the message is, it's not about saving the planet. It's about saving yourself as a very high order expression of nature, which is the human being and its capacity. So I think if we pointed, the discussion inward and saying, how do I save myself to open up to more love, to open up to a way that I can then go out into the world that allows me to fulfill my mission and my purpose, and in that way create a ripple effect in whatever sphere you operate. I remember seeing this one chat by a guy called Robin Sharma, that was the one that wrote The Monk That Sold His Ferrari and the 5 a.m. Club, that he talked about. I don't know where it was. He talks about this guy in this airport that cleans the bathroom, and for him, that bathroom is his office, and he sees it as a place to create joy for travelers while they have to go to the bathroom. So he wants them to come in and just have a surprising experience. So there's music, he's very joyful. And it is amazing people's reactions coming out of the bathroom at an airport, where it's kind of like, huh, it's inspiring. The dude that cleans the bathroom is inspiring executives to shift their mindset. So you had in Madrid a bunch of different taxi drivers that had, like, one guy was the honey taxi, where he sold honey, and there was another guy, there was like 3 or 4 of them, and they just wanted to add their own spice and joy into the taxi. That is a mindset. That doesn't cost money. That is just a different way of seeing the world and your place in it. So, in terms of what I see, my role in all of this is just a tiny, tiny drop in the ocean of helping to shift that perspective to say, things do not need to be the way you think they need to be. They can be closer to the way you want them to be. And that starts with an internal realization that you're creating your reality as it is in your head. It's a fiction. So choose your fiction wisely. Choose a fiction that resonates. Choose a fiction that will allow you upon your deathbed to look back and say, damn, that was worth living. That was a great game.
Okay, that's beautiful. I'd like to poke into one thing before we're ending, and that is, you said you don't go into the love discussion directly. You Trojan horse your way into it. I get the feeling of why you would do that, because I've also done that. But at the same time, I know that if there's one thing that's common to all of us, it's this feeling that we love.
Right.
So what's wrong with love that we have to Trojan horse it?
So I can answer it really quickly, because kind of I got the hit as you asked the question. I am just learning what that means. I am just learning what it is to live from the heart, to open to love, and that's the learning that I'm doing. So it feels uncomfortable / hypocritical for me to go in and talk about love if I don't yet know what it really means to actually be acting from a place of love in all aspects of your life, so that I can say, this is what it feels like, this is what it looks like. And I want, and I will get there, because I think underneath everything, that is what lies. So my bullshit rationalized excuse saying I work with executives, and as it is, just the sphere of motion is already a leap to then talk about love. But when I mentioned it as a Trojan horse, is when you put people together into a room and you make them breathe together, that creates connection. When you put people through an ice bath or some other type of extreme thing, it actually triggers oxytocin as part of the required bonding for survival. That is creating love, but you're not calling it love, but people feel it. So at the end of a retreat, that feeling of connection, of deeper human connection, which to me is love, I'd rather them feel it than me talk about it, so that they walk away saying, wow, that was like, that really, that filled my soul.
So that's a beautiful interpretation of the Trojan horse, right? So the Trojan horse, in the original sense, is something that you use to trick somebody. Because you're hiding something. The way you were describing it right now is that you are actually the Trojan horse, because you're carrying the love within, you're embodying love. So instead of talking about it, you just enact it, and through the enactment and the embodiment, you give the space for it to emerge.
So for example, one of the things that I love to do, and again, this is not terribly original, but depending on what the group is and what we're doing, is say, okay, a lot of what we're going to work on is feeling comfort in discomfort. And pushing the breath holds, being without oxygen, then saturating, the ice bath, like mental models that are going to push your thinking. And I like to start with the most uncomfortable thing that people feel, which is eye gazing. So sit in front of your colleague, look into their eyes for 2 minutes. That naturally bubbles emotions. That naturally kind of, it's unsettling, because you're like, you're building connection, you're building love. And so there's certain things that I think the lesson is better taught through experience and feeling than talking about it. But what I do have to recognize is that I am just learning this language. And to be able to bring it out, I need to learn more, and I need to also develop my self-mastery so that it can really be a true Trojan horse. And coming back to to my Wim Hof experience in Poland, what was really fascinating was I did not go there to meet people. I did not go there to build a community. It's like, if anything, I was like, I just want to go and have my space. I was in a group, there were 60 people, 3 groups of 20. Mine ended up being all guys, and we were actually all staying at what was Wim's old house in Poland. At the end of the trip, the connection that was built emotionally between all of us is it made me realize how anesthetized my friends are in terms of the relationship. It's just like I couldn't even point to it until I felt that there was a much deeper connection that you could have with other humans at a level that it's an amplified feeling, it's an amplified sensation. And that is something that I do really want to, but I think the ways that you also tease it out is how I show up, how I interact. That's why it's like, I just sort of feel like I am channeling stuff that I've learned, and I have a responsibility to pass it through, not put my brand on it. It's just.
Okay. But that loops back into being sovereign, right? Because you are sovereign. You don't have the need to put a brand on it, right? You can only authentically transport it if you detach yourself from it,
because it's not mine to begin with. I'm a steward in an essence. It's like there is this knowledge that I've learned that is not like coming out of you know, very weird mystical places, it's kind of like, okay, my responsibility is to take this, and I'm the steward of this knowledge, to then share it and pass it on. Now, I put a price on it for two reasons. One, yeah, I do need to make a living. And the second part is there's the commitment in this world. Because but in my business model, like, I want to be working with executives and sort of CEOs, founders, and all this. And I would love, as I develop this business, take all of the content and all of the tools that I've come across that are not sort of proprietary to somebody else, and just put them online for free. It's like, I sort of feel that this is, you know, learnings of humanity that, you know, should be expanded, and they should be free.
I fully agree.
So I really, so when there's too much monetization of stuff that, first of all, is just repurposing what has been talked about for hundreds, if not thousands of years, except everybody wants to put their name on it. You do more in your soul evolution by letting it be free and letting it expand, and trying to control and limit it, and, you know, put your stamp on it.
That taps into something, into a totally different domain, but we touched upon it a little bit, or you touched upon it a little bit with a pointer towards crypto and these new economies that we can build, where we actually can do our own financial policies, run our own financial policies. And what a thought experiment I did a while ago was around the purpose, the why of economy in the first place, right? And if you say, okay, the purpose actually is to have a good life. Now, what is a good life? You could use something like in Maslow's dimensions and say, okay, let's try and fill them all up in one life as much as we can. That's a good life, and it's also subjective. Your physiological well-being is different from mine. After a certain point, you know, all of that. Then you can ask a question: what are the inputs required for the fulfillment of these 5 dimensions?
Right. And
you can code these inputs in different forms of capital, and rather use the word potential for capital. So we can say that for your physiological needs, you need living potential and material potential.
Yeah.
That's non-negotiable, right? You need some stuff you can weave into clothes. You need some stuff to put on top of each other so you have a shelter, all of that.
Right.
But with your friends, with social potential, with some knowledge, with intellectual potential, or with some experiential potential, you can do more of that. You can do this better. And on a very, very abstract level, you can say, we can use financial potential to get all of the other stuff. But it's very abstract, right?
Yeah.
So now you can, from that, if you do that for all of the 5 dimensions, you can create a matrix, and you can actually create a valuation system between those forms of potential.
Right.
And then, if depending on how you set the parameters, what turns out is that financial potential is actually only contributing at roughly 8% towards a good life.
Yeah.
And to make that really visible, and to understand that social or cultural or spiritual are even individually much stronger components of what a good life means. It was very powerful.
Yeah, no, it's in there was something that you're very familiar with that did not make the cut in the documentary. There was an interview with the guy that is currently running the Harvard happiness study, the multi-generational. And it's like, okay, it's clear. Happiness and fulfillment and what we can consider a good life has everything to do with the quality of human relationships in your life.
Mhm.
That drives satisfaction, that drives health, that drives well-being, that drives fulfillment. It's like, it's clear how we interact and the quality of those connections is the swing factor. So it makes total sense in the thought model that it's that those social relations and all those things are such a fundamental part of the game.
Mhm. Yeah.
And that to me is one of the things that scares me within the crypto world, is having been in the VR business. I totally get the wonders and the perils of virtual reality. But as I start to see this move to the metaverse and this whole replication of life in a digital thing where we just transport our brains, in essence, because we're not transporting our bodies in there. So we're, cutting out the vast majority of the sensorial input required to like thrive as a species. And even with a mindset that actually, it's bad hardware. So if we could get rid of the bad hardware, then we could really thrive in this wonderful virtual world. But it scares me in the culture of distraction, what that can mean in terms of the depth of human connection.
Mhm.
Connectivity, exponential. Everybody will be connected to everybody. But the depth of connection, without human to human contact. And again, you saw it in the documentary. It's like babies need human to human connection for those neural pathways to grow. You can't just put that person on a screen to stimulate the child. The full human needs to be present for the growth to happen.
Well, I believe that there could be a combination.
Yeah.
So I mean, part of our lives lived in our physical reality locally with the people, deeply entangled with the people around us, creating life where it happens. But at the same time, doing what we do here now, weaving a web of knowledge, relationship, information, feeling, love over the globe with more and more people is simultaneously possible. I
agree.
And I also agree that no, I don't agree because you didn't say it, but I think I interpreted that from your description, that we have to be careful with the ownership of the metaverse. And so if it's a commons, it is actually capable of delivering this this meta layer of connectivity. If it's not, if it's just the next advertising gig of Facebook, then it's a problem. And of course, at the moment, it looks like it's more likely to be the advertising business.
Got it. Hey, I see I might have to go attend to the rest of the wood guy shortly.
Yeah, no problem. No problem.
I'm getting waved at, but yeah, don't. I think
we're coming to a closing anyway, so we're 8 minutes to the hour, and I'll have to drop off in 8 minutes anyway. So, but it was really, really good speaking with you, man. It was
awesome.
I learned a lot. It was deep. I really enjoyed that conversation. I really look forward to our next one.
Yeah, absolutely. Would love to, and have a lot of love for you and Vanessa. So
thank you.
So
same to you, and looking forward to having you and Max here.
Yeah, awesome. Big kiss.